Healthcare-onomics, changing healthcare by changing the way you think about healthcare. Hello and welcome to the Healthcare-onomics podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Wacasey, and today's special guest is Dean Clancy. Dean is a policy analyst, consultant, opinion writer, and public speaker who has held policy positions in Congress, the White House, and the U.S. healthcare industry. He currently counsels clients on a variety of policy and political matters and has a special interest in healthcare financing. Dean is the president and founder of HSAs for All, a nonprofit that works to enable all Americans, including the uninsured, to have a tax-advantaged health savings account that will allow them to save and spend their own money for their own health care tax-free. In political terms, Dean is a passionate advocate for civil rights, federalism, and local self-government, and feels that the way to restore America's founding principles is by following the Constitution as originally understood. You can find out more about Dean at his website, deanclancy.com, and follow him on his Twitter handle, @DeanClancy. For more information on health savings accounts, check out his page, hsasforall.org. I'll put the links below. And Dean, I want to welcome you to the show, and I think after reading that introduction, I see why we get along so well together.
No, it's a real pleasure.
Well, thank you.
And can you give me the 2-sentence bio of yourself?
A disruptor. I think we were talking about this just before we started recording, and that is that I'm worried somewhat about making people offended, but then again, I think that offending the right people at the right time is going to help more people who are on the hook right now for what they shouldn't be, as far as changing the mindset of American healthcare. I like to say what I'm trying to do with this project or brand or whatever you want to call it is basically I want to change American healthcare by changing the way Americans think about their healthcare. And I think we're pretty much in the same boat in that regard.
Okay. I follow your Twitter feed.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
But I always ask myself, why does he do it? I mean, talk about a thankless task of, just trying to remind people. It's sort of like saying, guys, 2 and 2 make 4, over and over and over and over. But it's good. I'm glad you do it.
I appreciate that.
What moved you to do it? Not to get off topic, but
sure. No, I don't mind. I was asked this question by a gentleman that I've been working with for some months now. We're trying to put a project together to do some things for corporations and help alleviate some of the healthcare woes. And he asked me the point blank question himself. He said, "What motivates you?" And I said, "Revenge." And he said, "Revenge? That's kind of a nutty topic. I mean, are you serious? What revenge against what?" And I said, "Well, the health insurance industry primarily." And he said, I kind of get it, but I don't really get it. What can you expand upon that? And I said, well, gosh, I mean, the health insurance industry is what really ruined American healthcare. I wrote a book about it. I've written a couple of books, but my first book was The Guide to Buying Health Insurance and Healthcare. And basically, I go over the whole history of how, or at least in my opinion, how the whole health insurance industry took off after World War II, how it took over healthcare with the idea of health insurance being prepaid healthcare instead of really an insurance type product.
Right.
And they managed to establish themselves and become the arbiters of all things healthcare. And what has really changed and what's got me motivated these days to try and help people think about it differently is the idea of high deductibles. I mean, if you have a deductible that's in the 4-figure range, you no longer have prepaid healthcare anymore. You have a true insurance product. And I think that as a physician myself practicing, and I detail this in the book, I got firsthand experience with this several years ago when I was working in a freestanding emergency department. I could hear for the first time in my career what went on at the registration desk, and I would hear these people come in, the patients, and they would be told by these clerks, well, it looks like you got a $3,000 deductible that you hadn't met yet, but your copay today is only $50. And the patients would be like, $50? That's great. And then I got to see them a few weeks later when they came back screaming about the bill where they'd been charged $2,700 for a sore throat visit. And they wanted to speak to me, yours truly, and that made me, I can't tell you how many times I had 911 punched up on my phone in case shots were fired because they were that angry, and they have every right to be that angry. But it convinced me that things have changed within the health insurance realm to where now they've convinced people that beforehand, it was all about you pay your $5 copay and that's it. As Tony Soprano would say, we take care of everything. But nowadays, it is where you pay them thousands of dollars a year to have this coverage that, like any true insurance product, you hardly ever get to use.
Right.
So that's what drives me.
So you came out. It came out of your own lived experience.
Yes.
As a physician.
Yes.
And
So,
I mean, I'm just a policy wonk. So I've only sort of studied this stuff. Of course, I have, health benefits like everybody, and I have to wrestle with copays and all that stuff.
Sure.
But I've never had anyone point a gun at me or get mad at me.
I haven't either. Not yet. Well, you're my favorite policy wonk, by the way, and let me say why that is. I'm pretty harsh on my Twitter and other profiles, my social media, about healthcare policy wonks, and it's largely because I think most of them, the vast majority of them, and maybe you'll agree with me, are bought and paid for by the industry. Their whole purpose, it seems to me that a lot of them, or some of them, their whole purpose is just to maintain this big myth of healthcare, this idea that we need health insurance to have any kind of health care, and you clearly stand out apart from that, and so I appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to hear it, because I do try not to be bought and paid for. I do have clients.
Yes.
I have to earn a living. I got kids in college.
Sure.
But I try only to work for clients where I feel really aligned with what they're trying to do. So like healthcare sharing ministries and the HSA movement. You mentioned the group I started recently, HSAs for All.
Yeah. I wanted to discuss that. Yeah. Let's get into that.
Yeah. Well, basically, the idea is instead of everybody thinking in terms of how much insurance do I have, like these low deductibles and third parties meddling in your business and getting between patients and doctors, why not help people to just pay cash for medical care? And yes, have insurance that's, for the truly catastrophic event. That's real insurance. That's a good thing.
Yes.
Of course, it should be priced according to risk.
Absolutely.
But what about that deductible? What about all the, the routine expenses or even the surprise medical expenses? Well, people should save. Of course, they're discriminated against, so
yes.
Tax. They're taxed, basically, if it's for health care. But the one exception to that has been the health savings account that Congress created in 2003,
I believe, or 3.
Yes,
Okay.
Well, they passed the bill in late 2003, and it came online in 2004.
I have to say, when they passed that and President Bush signed it into law, I immediately was like, "Wow, this is a game changer." But here we are, almost 15 years later, and it's still not that big of a player. So let's
it's
talk
not,
about that.
Though it has grown by leaps and bounds.
Yes.
I mean, there's between 20 and 30 million Americans benefiting from an HSA now. So we're somewhere between like 5 and 10% of the U.S. population. But obviously that leaves another 90 to 95% who are doing something else. And, of course, you can have insurance with an HSA. In fact, by law right now, you have to. One of the things that you have to have a high deductible policy as defined in the law. And there are limits about what you can spend the money on and whether you can contribute under certain conditions and so on. The net result of the current law is that about 90% of the American people cannot contribute to an HSA at any given moment. Wow. And, I mean, if you work for an employer who offers a plan that is HSA qualified, then you can have an HSA. But, like, if you're on Medicare, Medicaid, you can't contribute to an HSA. And so what HSA is for all, the idea is let's de-link it from insurance, first of all.
Right.
Have whatever insurance you want, but if you don't want to have any insurance, you still should be able to save for your own health care expenses.
And can I get you to re-clarify that for the audience? Let's go over that again. You have to have a high deductible health insurance plan. And do you know what the limits are for 2019 or 2018?
Oh, not off the top of my head. Basically, you're supposed to have a deductible.
It's in thousands of dollars, though.
Yeah, right? I think it's around $3,500.
Okay.
Although I may be confusing that with the contribution limits. There are limits on how much you can put in. There's limits on your deductible.
So in other words, if you have a $1,000 deductible, if you have a $500 deductible, the so-called good health insurance, then you will not qualify for an HSA, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so
it's kind of a straitjacket. The idea at the time it was passed was people are overinsured. Most people had much lower deductibles than they do now.
Right.
That was fueling waste. People didn't feel the price of health care, so they were overspending. And so why not encourage them to voluntarily adopt a higher deductible and have this tax advantage savings account. It's all voluntary, but you do have this straitjacket you agree to put on.
Right.
But what I'm saying is we've gotten to the point where everybody's got a really high deductible, whether they like it or not.
That's right.
Thanks to Obamacare and the rising cost of health care. So why not delink it from insurance? You just let people have a tax advantage savings account. The only restrictions that would remain would be there would be limits on what you spend the money for. It has to be for medical expenses.
Right.
It's a health savings account, not just a savings account.
Right. Can't be for potato chips and et cetera.
Yeah, and that's already defined in the law. There's a list in the Section 213D of the IRS tax code that lists what is medical care from the government's point of view.
Speaking to that, I've had patients ask me to write them prescriptions for things like Motrin and Tylenol and over-the-counter products so that they can get credit from their HSA. They use their HSA to purchase this, so it qualifies as a medical expense.
So they have a record.
Correct. And I don't mind doing it, I mean, hey, if it's helping them save $1, hey, I don't mind doing that.
Yeah, well, it used to be that you could buy over-the-counter medicines with your HSA money. Then Congress, in the Obamacare law, took away you can only do prescription drugs, and I don't think you can do over-the-counter purchases unless it might be like things like the canes and walkers and things you might be able to do.
Right. Okay. So maybe they were incorrect in asking me that, but I did it just to help them out. I mean, I don't know the law, but
I won't report you. It's a violation. Anyway, so the idea of the HSA, as I'm proposing to reform it, is no link to insurance, and you spend it on health care. That's the only major limitation. Then in terms of what you can put in it, I would take away the contribution limits on after-tax dollars. In other words, if you get money in your paycheck, you've already paid the taxes, through withholding. So now that's your after-tax money. You can put as much of that in your HSA as you want. Right now there's a strict limit on how much you can put in. It's only a few thousand a year, basically. And I would leave the restrictions for pre-tax money. So if your employer gives you some money and doesn't take the taxes out, and you put that in your HSA, then I would just leave the existing limits for that money. But for your own money that you've already paid taxes on, put as much as you want, and let your HSA build up tax-free, and let people pay their own way.
So let's talk a little bit more about the tax advantages. The tax advantage that exists now, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can put in the money pre-tax. In other words, the money that you divert into an HSA from your paycheck is not taxable income, correct?
Yeah, it is.
That's what it is now.
From the definition of income.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's not taxed as income. So it's a very generous tax break, because not only do you avoid income tax, but you also avoid payroll tax on that money. So it's a very generous tax break.
And that exists currently.
Yes.
So let me clarify something for the audience. If you put money into an HSA account, and I want to get into this kind of differentiation between an HSA and, say, a flex spending account. We can talk about that in a minute. But one of the big differences between an HSA and the flex spending account, I'm going to go over a difference now, and I say this in one of my tweets and in one of my short little videos on my YouTube channel, is the money that you put into it on, let me rephrase that, on January 1st of next year, which is coming up, the money that you put into an HSA becomes yours again, because it's not use it or lose it, unlike a flex spending account. That's extremely important distinction. But let me clarify this too. With an HSA currently, if I leave, let's say, $10,000 or $5,000 in that, does that money grow? I mean, I know that it grows. I know that it's an account that's like an IRA or a 401k. You can do certain investments with it, I believe, and that money grows. Does that money grow tax free, or are you taxed on it currently?
No, the HSA is different from an IRA in this respect. An IRA, traditional IRA, you put in pre-tax money. So you don't pay the taxes. You just put the money in the account. You let it grow tax-free. But then when you go to take the money out in retirement, that's when you pay tax on it.
Correct.
So you eventually do pay tax on it. A Roth IRA is the reverse. You put in after-tax dollars, let them grow tax-free, and then when you take the money out, you don't have to pay tax because you already paid tax up front. The HSA is different from either the traditional or the Roth IRA because the money you put in can be pre-tax, it grows tax-free, and it's not taxed when you take it out.
Wow.
It's the only account like that.
Wow.
So it's in some ways the most generous savings account.
Yeah.
But, there are those limits we talked about.
And what's amazing is that the number one concern, if you look at polls and you look at the news, which I don't know which news to trust anymore, to be honest with you, but still, if you look at all these things, they constantly remind us that the number one concern on Americans' minds these days is healthcare.
Yep.
And it seems to me that anyone with a little bit of financial stewardship or prudence would be saying, give me an HSA right now. These things are just wonderful. They have all the tax advantages. In fact, it seems like from what you just discussed, already they exist in the form that they're the most tax-advantaged account out there, correct?
They are.
Yeah.
They're great, but they do
everywhere.
have limitations. And as I said, if you're on Medicare, you're on Medicaid, you can't contribute to an HSA. If you have a workplace plan and your employer doesn't offer an HSA qualified plan, then you can't contribute to an HSA. And so in other words, they're a great deal. Most people can't access them.
And why? Let me ask you this. When it comes to employers, I know there's a huge amount of inertia in getting employers to look at different health insurance or health coverage options. President Trump recently signed an executive order that allows for the creation of association health plans. I think those things are going to put a huge dent, if maybe not put a hole, in the side of the health insurance ship that helps sink it. But I know that employers are extremely reluctant to go ahead with any kind of changes to their health insurance because of their employees, the psychology involved, the mindset of the employees being that, we don't want to change, we can't change. You're taking away our health care. What, in your opinion or experience, has been, if any, reluctance on the employer's part to do HSAs?
Well, when they do an HSA, the employee has an expectation usually that the employer will put money in the HSA. So, put pre-tax dollars in for the employee as part of the benefit. Some employers might not, want to do it that way because they're already going to be paying the premiums on the insurance. Some employers have tried to control the costs of their health benefit plans by trying to herd everybody into an HMO or a PPO with a very narrow network and high costs if you go out of network. I mean, the employers have been in this cost control fight for decades now. They tried the really restrictive HMOs with the gatekeepers in the 90s. There was a big backlash against that. Now most people choose some kind of PPO, a preferred provider organization where you can go out of network for extra cost. But why aren't HSAs offered more? I think part of it might be that that straitjacket about the kind of insurance that you offer with the HSA has to have a certain deductible, and it has to have, and nothing. It actually says you can't have anything below you can't pay for anything below the deductible. Like preventive care has to be 100% free, no copays, nothing. You have to feel that deductible on everything else until you hit it. And, there's all these sort of requirements, which maybe some employees don't really want. And so I'm not seeing a big reason. I don't certainly think there's a conspiracy against HSAs on the part of employers. I think if they thought they'd save money with them, they would offer them. In fact, the largest growth in HSAs in the past 5 years has been among employer-based plans, and especially the large employers have been adding HSA options. And in fact, a lot of them have switched to what they call a HSA only, a full where they get rid of all of their other health benefits and they only offer an HSA qualified plan.
So rather than a conspiracy amongst the employers, now I am not a conspiracy theorist. I do live in Dallas, Texas. I still question whether Oswald acted alone. I've been over there a few times. But in any case, I'm not a giant conspiracy theorist, but I do think in this case that it sounds to me like the HSA laws and regulations that govern these things regarding the requirements and deductibles, etc., that may have been crafted or shaped a little bit by our friends at the health insurance
Oh,
industry.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I absolutely agree with you. Delinking this from health insurance is the logical next step. I mean, if people have their money and it's their product, their work product, it's their income, and they want to choose to spend it a certain way, they should be allowed to do that in any way possible. The only sticking point for me, if I were a politician, would be the tax savings, the tax advantage stuff. But I mean, I guess that the health insurance lobby has fingers that extend very, very far. But I am glad to hear that, like what you're saying, the employers are not, it's not that they're reluctant to do this like they are, in my experience, with changing health insurance or changing their mindset about health coverage. Right. It's not so much that they're reluctant as much as they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place, it sounds like.
Yeah, employers are a victim, and they become an interest because their employees want the benefit, and it's something they use to compete for labor.
Sure.
You know, basically, we're all victims of the bad policy.
I detail in my book, in my first book, how that if health insurance hadn't gotten married to employment by the 50s, then by the 70s, it probably would have been a fringe product because we wouldn't have needed it. The prices of healthcare would have kept pace with inflation. At least that's my limited take on it.
Health insurance should be like automobile insurance or homeowners insurance. It should be priced based on risk.
Right.
And be able to buy as much or as little as you think you need. And if you do it that way, people have an incentive to buy while they're healthy.
Sure.
So you'll get a bigger pool. You know, you let market forces work, it will work. And instead, we've gone down this path of employer-based health systems through the tax code, and then we decided we got to have HMOs, the HMO Act of 1973. And we decided we had to have HIPAA and ERISA and Obamacare. And we basically keep compounding the mistakes. So now that they've effectively outlawed real insurance, effectively outlawed.
Yeah. I have this hashtag. I know you've seen it on Twitter. You've probably never heard me sing it, but it's to the tune of the Journey song, Don't Stop Believing It. It's Don't Stop Repealing. That's terrible, I know, forgive me. But the bottom line is Congress needs to repeal all these gigantic laws, and I make this case over and over again, that we don't need to replace anything. We don't need to repeal and replace Obamacare. What we need to do is repeal and peel back and get rid of all these laws like ERISA and the HMO Act of 1973. Believe me, I'm not holding my breath, but these are the laws that compound and confound and confuse and just make it so that we can't have a market-based health insurance coverage system.
Right. Yeah, and not one of them is really necessary.
Right.
And the feds don't add any value here. The states and the private sector can handle this. They've got it. They were doing a fine job before the feds meddled. So, yeah, you just repeal all those laws. It sounds shocking, but in fact, it's not that big a deal. There would be disruption, and you have to deal with that if you're a politician.
Well, that brings us to our to what I wanted to talk to you about next, and I mentioned this article a few times on Twitter because I ran across it. Yeah. Somehow, some way, I got a hold of it off your blog, and it is wonderful. And and a lot of articles on your blog are wonderful. And if you'll come back sometime, we'll talk about many of them. But the GOP's across state lines idea is dumb. And I have to tell you, when I wrote my book, I need to revise it already because one of my solutions for health insurance, and let me digress a little bit. My solution for healthcare is this, folks. As a physician, one of the other things that has got me going on my revenge mission against health insurance right now is that the idea that healthcare is expensive, that it's costly. And I like to say it's not the costs of healthcare that are outrageous, it's the charges. And so everything that we think about healthcare being costly and expensive, it's really not. And that is a huge psychological mindset that Americans need to come to grips with. I mean, when I tell my patients, and I operate a direct pay or direct patient care practice in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And when I tell my patients, hey, we need to do an MRI of your knee or of your back or your brain or what have you, they're, what was that? It's going to be thousands and I'm not going to get it for 6 months. I say, no, you can go get it tomorrow. And I think they're on sale this month for $300 or maybe $350. I think the most expensive one I've ever ordered was $400. Haven't sent anybody back there again because I found a competitor that was cheaper. So, yeah, and that's the market at work. But one of the things I point out when I'm trying to discuss, and that's where my expertise ends in my book, is the health insurance piece. Maybe I'll have you help me write the revision. But I foolishly put in there in my first book that we need to sell health insurance across state lines, that would help. I fell for the trick. And when I read your
And
article,
most people do. Most
yeah,
on the right or the center. And
right,
actually, across the spectrum, people find it a very attractive idea.
right, and I
You're
fell
not
for it.
alone. You're not alone.
And then I read your article, and I was crestfallen a little bit. I was like, huh. Well, I got that wrong. I'm going to open myself up to criticism, but by not too many people other than Dean. So let's go over that article, if you don't mind. In the article, you say, of all the various Republican health care reform ideas, the most popular by far is letting people buy health insurance across state lines. But there are 3 problems. Now, if you can remember these, let's discuss these 3 problems and go into a little detail, if you don't mind.
Jog my memory.
You said that
I can certainly do it, but
you said that number 1, it's unconstitutional.
Yep.
And if you would go into that a little bit.
I'll give you a sentence or 2 on each of these points.
Sure.
Unconstitutional. Why? Because Congress has no enumerated power to regulate health insurance or health care. People say, well, what about the Commerce Clause?
Exactly.
Well, 2 things. One, the Commerce Clause doesn't give Congress a power to do anything about anything that happens to be economic, which is the way the Supreme Court has come to define commerce. Basically, it's no limitation at all.
Correct.
The Commerce Clause is really about regulating the shipment of goods across state lines.
Right.
And that brings me to the second point, which is insurance is not commerce for constitutional purposes. Now, the Supreme Court in 1944, in a decision called Southeastern Underwriters, changed its longstanding position. For more, I think, 150 years, the court had said insurance is not commerce for purposes of the Commerce Clause, so Congress has no jurisdiction to regulate it. In 1944, they switched, and that's another one of these problems that's led to our current mess.
Right.
So all of that points to Congress has no authority to do the across state lines.
Right. Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this the problem that Justice Roberts ran up against when he decided that Obamacare was a tax because it wasn't commerce? Is that the way it went down?
Right. In that opinion in 2012, Roberts and the 4 more conservative justices, Thomas, Scalia, Alito, and Kennedy,
right,
the 5-man majority with Roberts said Congress has no power under the Commerce Clause to mandate the purchase of health insurance. Right. They didn't say that Congress has no jurisdiction over health insurance. They just said it didn't extend as far as mandating that you purchase health insurance.
Right.
That was part 1. Part 2 was Roberts joining with the 4 liberal justices, Kagan, Breyer, Sotomayor,
Ginsburg.
And Ginsburg, thank you. The divine RBG. and
hope she's doing well, by the way.
Yes, I wish her good health and a prompt retirement.
Yeah,
but anyway,
yes.
So those 5 agreed that the tax penalty with the mandate is just a tax. It just raises revenue for the government. It just happens to tax you only if you fail to follow that mandate, which is over here in another place in the law.
Right.
But we'll just sort of ignore that unconstitutional provision, and we'll let you do what you're trying to do through this tax thing.
And then carrying it forward a little bit now into current very recent history in my home state of Texas. Just last week, Obamacare was declared unconstitutional because this idea that it was a tax was nulled and voided this year when President Trump eliminated the individual mandate. So I went to law school for a year. I'm not an attorney, and I would not want to be one. Thank you. Yeah. But I know enough to keep pace with some of this stuff, and it makes for some fascinating theater what's going to happen over the next few weeks and months as they battle this one out. But I think they got them right where they want them. I think that Obamacare, was upheld on this thin sliver of creationism on the part of Justice Roberts, who said that, it's a tax. Well, it's not a tax if you don't force me to do it, unlike the other forced at gunpoint tax laws that the U.S. government has created. Right. So it'll be very interesting what happens. So basically, health insurance is not commerce. It's not the shipment of goods. It's more of it's not even really a service industry as much as it is a contractual agreement between parties.
It's a contract, and it could be between citizens of different states. but that's not commerce
Yeah.
as understood originally. Now, the Supreme Court says it's okay because, it affects the economy. Everything you do affects the economy.
Sure, yeah.
So that definition is no limitation whatsoever. But if you follow the Constitution, then you can't do the across state lines thing.
Well, so the second point that you brought up, and this was a great one, was that you said that, look, it would be wonderful, or this is actually your first point in the article, but you said it would be wonderful if we had the opportunity to go and buy health insurance on a national level, like the auto insurances of the world, the Geicos, the Progressives. You get online and you just buy a policy. Well, you can do that with ehealthinsurance.com, I believe it is.
Yeah.
You've been able to do that for 20 years, which that's a whole other podcast. We can talk about why the government had to spend billions of dollars to set up exchanges when you could already buy health insurance online. But we'll save that for a different podcast.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that you make some very great points in this article about how even the auto insurance that you purchase in, let's say, Texas, and if you move to Kentucky or you move to Virginia, you're not getting the same auto insurance policy. It may be the same umbrella company. It may sound like the same company, but it's a different state, different company. It's like franchisees, I would say, because in each of these is subject to different state laws. And if you would expound upon that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, insurance is still in this country largely regulated at the state level. And obviously in health insurance that's changing as the feds assume more power. But right. In automobile insurance, for example, you buy a Geico and you live in Virginia, and then you move to Kansas. Well, what really happens is when you change your address, that tells Geico, oh, he's left our state, now he's living in another state. So Geico of Virginia hands you off to Geico of Kansas. It's all pretty much done behind the scenes. You might have to sign something or click on something online to effectuate. So you're still with the same national company, but it's really a federation of 50 state companies is really what Geico and Progressive and those companies are.
Right.
It just looks national, and it looks like they're competing across state lines. And, of course, they do compete, and they advertise and all that, and because, market forces are definitely at work, but they're regulated by states.
At the state level.
That system works great.
It does.
There's no need for the feds to regulate auto insurance.
And this brings us to the third point that you make in your awesome article, and that is that it's unnecessary. We don't need health insurance to be sold across state lines. If the feds would get out of health insurance like they have auto, well, they've never gotten into auto or homeowners insurance, these other types. If they would get out of health insurance so much and just leave it up to the states, then we wouldn't need the idea of selling health insurance across state lines.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what you need is those reforms we talked about earlier. Don't stop repealing. If we actually did that stuff and we had health insurance become like auto insurance,
yes,
then the cross state lines thing would be pointless. I mean, it would work fine. You wouldn't need it. So yeah, unconstitutional, unnecessary, and but it sounds great. And I myself was drawn to it for many years until I stopped to really try to think about it.
Right.
That's why I wrote the article.
So do you think that we'll ever get to a point where this is widely known? Is this something that is going to matter? Where do you see the future of this whole idea of state line? Because as you point out in your article, Republican policymakers, Republican legislators are putting forth bills that do this, and they have their legislative advisors, but they don't have their Dean Clancy's working for them.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, and yes, there are bills in Congress. Some of the most conservative constitutionalist members of Congress have been the ones to put in these bills, and the way they frame the bill is, we, Congress, exercising our authority to regulate interstate commerce, hereby decree that if a person in State A wants to buy an insurance policy that will be regulated by State B rather than his own state, he can agree to that contractually, and then the laws of State B will apply to that insurance policy. So that's knocking down the state walls, but it's on a case-by-case, you as an individual choosing to do it. Now, as I said, that's unconstitutional.
Right.
It's constitutional under the Supreme Court's liberal reading of the Constitution.
Right.
It's not constitutional.
Right.
It's just, and it's not, as we said, it's not necessary. So that's conservative. bills that have gone in. That idea, however, I don't believe got included in the Republicans' repeal in place bills in 2017.
Okay.
It dropped by the wayside. And by the way, there's a footnote to Obamacare. The Democrats actually put an across the state lines piece into Obamacare. Most people have never heard of it. It basically said if states want to form sort of agreements with each other, compacts or treaties with each other, to let individuals choose which state's insurance regulations they want,
Okay.
they can do that.
Huh.
And I think a couple of states have sort of made some moves to try it, but there's really been no interest because the states are not interested in giving away their regulatory authority.
Right. Giving it up to the feds, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So there is one form of across state lines I do support, and I mentioned it in the article. I just remembered. There is an interstate compact that facilitates that handoff from Virginia to Kansas, as a sort of something you almost don't even see. It's invisible to the consumer.
But it's for the auto and other insurance industries, correct?
That's right.
Yeah,
and
it already exists.
It already exists, and I guess all states or most states are parties to that compact. If you had just amended that compact to allow this to happen for health insurance, plus don't stop repealing at the federal level, then you would have your across state lines.
So again, instead of the feds getting involved and creating more laws that are going to make it worse, if we would just shave back laws, repeal laws, and then allow the states to do their thing, hey, it's a free market. The last point I want to make about the article, and really the one that drove it home for me and that I harp upon a lot when I tweet out about the article on social media, is the idea of what you say that less than 5% or 10%, I can't remember the exact number, of Americans actually own their own individual health insurance policies. Let me clarify that. In other words, most people's health insurance is not theirs. It's part of a group plan and it belongs to, like, say, their employer or what have you. So this health insurance is not individualized. It's not portable. And I agree with you 100% that I think that's a big reason why the health insurers are able to keep their premiums and their premiums high and their benefits low.
Yeah, that's actually a big point. I'm glad you remembered that. 95% of us who have insurance or prepaid benefits have it through a group plan. Mm-hmm. But the future ought to be one where most people own an individual policy that they buy and they can carry with them. It doesn't matter if they change jobs or lose their job, they've still got health insurance. That's real insurance. And that's the kind of insurance that, unfortunately, Obamacare has well-nigh outlawed.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing that what you're describing, let me be clear for the audience, what you're describing already exists. And most people who are watching probably have this form of insurance in the form of a car policy or a homeowner's policy.
Right.
So this thing already exists. It just doesn't apply to health insurance yet. Yeah, which is a real shame.
True health insurance in healthcare has been relegated, to a little. It's a thing on the side, and it's hard to find, and it's more expensive than it should be because of the tax code discriminates against it,
right?
And because of all the federal mandates, and so that's why only 5% of people have it, and that may be even less now thanks to Obamacare.
I like to say, here's a commercial you'll never see. When health insurance companies compete, you win. That's not going to come about anytime soon, given our current state of affairs. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that everybody that's listening and watching gets some very valid information out of this. I do have hope for the future. Your kids that are in college, if any of them are looking to go into medicine, I think that the future of the practice of medicine is going to be very bright indeed, because I think the next few years are going to shape up to where Americans are going to realize that, hey, health insurance is more like insurance now, which means that it's like a chainsaw. It's something that I keep out in my garage for when I need it, and when I need it, man, it's great to have it. But it's not something that I look to use every time I want to do something. So Americans need to just get used to paying for most of their health care. And then, like you said, I want to make this clear. I'm absolutely for health insurance, but we should be using health insurance a couple of times in your lives, hopefully. You shouldn't want to use it.
That's it. And there is hope. The Trump administration has done some great things through executive action.
Yes.
even though Congress did fail. The judge's lawsuit that you mentioned will probably not be upheld by the higher courts for political reasons, basically.
Right.
But he found the logical absurdity in John Roberts' opinion from 2012. And, if the courts were honest, then Obamacare would be gone, or at least the core of Obamacare, the mandate and the mandates and price controls, those would go away.
Right.
Have a freer system. My feeling about Obamacare going away is that it's inevitable. I hope to be alive when it happens.
Right.
It is being dismantled slowly.
Yeah.
And so there's hope. And I just want to say I really admire what you're doing.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Your feed where you constantly just remind people of common sense. It's so sad that it has to be done. I'm so glad you're doing it, and you're doing a great job.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That reminds me, you had a line in the article, or in your bio on your website. You say, "I stand for the little guy in common sense," and I was gonna mention that common sense in healthcare these days, they just don't really go together that much. But in all fairness to Americans, I have to say this. It's not their fault. I mean, it's really not their fault. They've been taught wrongly. I remember a good Steve Martin skit that I heard years ago where he said, if you want to play a dirty trick on a 3-year-old kid, you when you're around them, you talk wrong. And so their first day of school, they get in school and they raise their hand. They say, "Mom, I'm a dog face to the banana patch." And, and it's like everybody else is looking at this kid saying, "What are you thinking?" And the kid's like, "What? That's how I speak." So I think Americans have been trained and taught and basically brainwashed to believe in what I call the big myth of healthcare, the idea that we need health insurance to take care of all healthcare, and I mean all of our healthcare, right down to the $5 copay. And I think that more and more people, given what you and I both are trying to do to get the word out, I really believe that more and more people, especially employers, are waking up to the idea that, hey, this value is not really worth, as my grandma would have said, the juice ain't worth the squeeze on these. So I think it's just a question of getting people to wake up and realize how much they're being had, and to see that there are viable alternatives. There are ways to work around this, especially given this association health plan thing, which I'm very hopeful for. So if you would tell our audience, if anyone is interested in getting in touch with you, what kind of services you could provide for them?
Well, sure. I'm a policy consultant. And, I help clients with things like preparing draft legislation or doing legislative research, policy research. I'm also pretty good with a spreadsheet, so I do budget estimating, like the cost of legislation.
Sure.
Like a little bit like sort of, I call it homebrew congressional budget office score.
Gotcha.
And that kind of thing. So, healthcare is the focus, but taxes, budget, really domestic policy generally. I'm happy to do research, and I also, will go and educate lawmakers and their staff.
Gotcha.
Advocacy work.
Okay.
And I've got, of course, the HSAs for All thing, which is a labor of love, where I'm trying to get people excited about the idea of taking HSAs to the next step.
Well, if you're an employer and you're interested about HSAs, then I would highly recommend you check out hsasforall.org. Again, I'll have the link below. And reach out to Dean if you think he might be able to help your organization, because I think it's a valuable resource. Dean, I want to thank you again, and I hope you'll come back. We have lots more to discuss, and I'll see you on Twitter.
Anytime. And yes, love your Twitter feed.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays, sir.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Now you can easily compare health insurance plans and pick the one that makes the most financial sense with the Dr. W's Equation app, available for Android and iPhone. And for more information on how you can save on health insurance and healthcare, check out my books, available now on Amazon, iTunes, and Nook. To help spread this message, please click the like button on this video. You can also subscribe to the Healthcareonomics YouTube channel and visit healthcareonomics.com.